Imagine being fluent in 4 languages at the age of 13. You'd think that you're a genius or a prodigy or something. But actually, as someone who became a polyglot at 13 years old, I can tell you I'm no genius or a prodigy or anything like that. I've just cracked the code to fluency in any language using this secret formula or equation that I don't see anyone talking about online. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid. I'm 15 years old and I became a polyglot at the age of 13 after getting fluent in Spanish, or conversationally fluent in Spanish. And so prior to then, I was already fluent in Azeri, English, Swedish, and then I got fluent in Spanish. And I grew up learning those 3 languages through this equation, which I'm going to talk about in this video. And mainly I got fluent after the summer of 2022, in which I spent a lot of my time hyperfixating on learning Spanish using a method that sort of was inspired by all the other people I saw online, and that prioritized this formula. And after the summer of 2022, I spent around 120 hours total of studying. And by that point, I was able to have conversations with natives for like an hour long. Here's how I sounded before that summer.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español.
Y ahora puedo hablar con fluidez y soy políglota, que es una persona que hable 4 o más idiomas que 4, como por ejemplo 4, 5, 6, 7 idiomas más o menos. Y en este video voy a hablar la única cosa que tienes que enfocarte para aprender el idioma que quieres aprender. My original motivation to learn Spanish and get fluent in Spanish was this guy in my class was using Duolingo, and he was getting essentially better at Spanish because he was doing Duolingo on the side. He wasn't really a super smart student, but he was like the best when it comes to Spanish. The rest of us saw that, and it started becoming like a trend in the class to start studying Spanish, and also the French, because in Sweden we study both French and Spanish. And so from there I discovered different apps, and I just essentially did a ton of research on language learning, specifically Spanish. And I discovered a language transfer, which I took that course, and that really opened my eyes when it comes to like language learning. And that gave me the further motivation to think, okay, you know what, this summer I'm going to put all my energy to learning Spanish. And another reason that got me motivated to want to achieve that goal was this YouTuber, actually 2 YouTubers named Shauma and Language Lords. Now, Language Lords was one guy who got fluent in like 44 days in Spanish, and Shauma got fluent in like 30 days or something like that, right? Both got conversationally fluent extremely quickly. And so my first impression was like, okay, let me hear them out, right? And I didn't have any money to spend, so I wasn't able to buy any of like the Pimsleur courses, which actually turned out to be a good thing because that means I didn't waste my time. And eventually, when I was watching both of these YouTubers, there was a pattern that I sort of found with people that got fluent in a language, at least the fluency that I was talking about. You see, my original goal was never to have perfect Spanish grammatically. Nor was my goal to be able to write an essay or be able to read a Spanish novel. Like, I didn't care about that. I just wanted to be able to speak fast and be able to walk into a Spanish store and order in Spanish. I mean, I didn't really care about like being able to have the perfect writing ability. I didn't really care about doing maths in Spanish. What I really cared about was just being able to naturally speak Spanish with, for example, the Spanish teacher. Or if there was a new Spanish student, then I would be able to speak only Spanish with him. And not only speak Spanish, but also have a very like native sounding accent, to the point where you'd hear it and you'll think, damn, that guy's completely fluent. To them, it would be like it's perfect Spanish, even though, of course, it's not. And so that was the goal that I was trying to achieve. And what was interesting is that the people that I watched, Shauma and Language Lords, their goals were also that, to be able to just have a conversation and maintain it. And then obviously Language Lords continued it to become native fluent. And so based on those frameworks that they showed in those videos, essentially both of them showed their methods to how they got fluent. I saw a pattern between them, and that sort of inspired this method, this formula that I used, which is very interesting because I actually got fluent. The reason why I say this formula got me to become a polyglot, even though I've only technically learned one language, because this formula has been applied to every single language anyone has ever learned, at least when it comes to becoming conversationally fluent and also native fluent. Although if we define native fluency as, for example, being able to read, for example, for Chinese, it's a little different. I'll get into that later when I talk about this equation. So what was very interesting to me was that, at least recently, I started making these videos, and after I got fluent, I didn't have any idea of making a YouTube channel until about 2 years later, where I started making these videos about how to get fluent in Spanish, using essentially the methods that I created. And the thing was, even before this channel, I would go around to the people in my class and I would try teaching them Spanish, and the method would work very well on them. And so my idea was like, okay, let me spread this message of these sort of frameworks. And so in one of these videos, this one guy commented, and I have a few people that like commenting hate comments on my videos, which are hilarious, by the way. Keep commenting those. And basically this guy was laughing at me almost, saying that like I'm not a polyglot because the other 3 languages that I know, I had learned them through just existing. And you know, it's a very funny sort of concept, okay? There's no such thing as learning something by existing. I know what he meant though. He meant that like you studied it while you were growing up automatically. You didn't have a choice, which is true. I did study those languages growing up, just not directly, so to speak, how do I say it? Just not actively engaged in learning the language. So I was still learning, I was still studying though. What these people don't understand is that fluency is all the same formula. And this is the formula that I'm going to talk about in this video. What is interesting though is that I'm a polyglot through this formula, but for the 3 languages that I've gotten fluent in, English, Azeri, and Swedish, I just implemented this formula naturally. I was forced to implement this equation, this formula that I'm going to talk about in this video. The reason why we know that this formula works is because it is the definition of what it means to be fluent. By the way, the name of this formula, I call it the fluency equation. And that's because it is the formula, the equation to fluency. Because I grew up, when I was learning my 3 languages that I first learned pretty much automatically, I grew up forced to apply this framework. Like, I was forced to apply it because of just the circumstances in which I was born, which I'm very lucky for. And the only reason anyone has ever gotten fluent in any language is by applying this equation. And so, you're gonna hear the equation, you're gonna think that's very simple. But when you actually implement the equation, you'll realize that it's very similar to how we got native in our own native languages, which is the same method that I used to get fluent in Swedish. It's all the same formula equation that I've used. So I'm going to switch to slides. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how did you learn your own native language? And this is what the fluency equation is all about. You spoke like your parents, and you listened to your parents. Think about it. Were you still able to be fluent in your native language, like being able to have conversations, when you couldn't read or write? Yes. You know, I have 2 Arabic friends, and they both can't read or write Arabic at all. They're still at a natively fluent level, and that's because all they did to get fluent is speak like their parents and listen to their parents, who are also natives. And so even though they can't read or write, they're still more than conversationally fluent. They're natively fluent. They're perfect accent and they can speak completely fluently. And so here is the formula, the equation that I use to become a polyglot at 13. And this is the same equation that I use to get fluent in my own native languages. Speaking times understanding equals fluency. That's it. That's the simplest explanation I could give you. Speaking times understanding equals fluency. Because by definition, the goal is to be able to have a conversation. And what is a conversation? What are the 2 things that we are exercising when we have a conversation? We are speaking and then we switch. You speak and I'm understanding you. And so speaking times listening, that is by definition what fluency is. And so it makes no sense to study anything else apart from this. And to break this down even more, after I'd done language transfer, I'd realized that Spanish in terms of sentence structure only has 2 elements to them in reality. And that is grammar times vocab. And that applies for obviously understanding as well, because both of them are Spanish, right? A Spanish sentence being said and a Spanish sentence being heard are both the same Spanish sentence. So it's both grammar and vocab. Grammar is sort of like the why behind the language, the reasons why we get certain things. And vocab is just like, okay, here is what the sentence is. Most people memorize vocab. They don't really learn grammar. And even when they do learn grammar, they learn it by memorizing. When you don't really understand why the vocab happens, why we get yo estoy hablando español, how do you even get to that sentence? If you don't understand that, if you just understand the vocab, even though technically vocab is all you need in a language, the problem is that you won't be able to say a million different variations of those words, which is exactly how we do it as natives. If I learned a new verb in English, I'll be able to say it in a million different ways because I'm able to essentially conjugate. You get it? So you have the vocab, the word. For example, okay, garner. I know what that word means, but let's just say garner. Now I know the vocab of garner, like to garner attention, which is how I understand the verb. Because I know the grammar of English, I understand why we get the different forms in English. I'm able to tell you, I garnered attention. I was going to garner a lot of attention. If he were to garner attention, okay, English conjugation is much easier, but essentially that in Spanish, okay? That is the thing we need to be able to do to get fluent, because that's what I saw Language Lords and Shama both do. It's essentially an implementation, and this is what we did as kids as well. You learned a word and then you played around with it. You spoke it over and over again, to which you were able to learn the grammar behind that, which is why kids, by the way, would say maybe speaked instead of spoke. It's because they took ed ending from other verbs like talked, right? We have ed at the end for the past tense. And they took that and applied it to another verb. Now, obviously, even though it was incorrect, that process of finding a pattern and implementing it is what grammar is by definition. That's what we did as kids to learn the language. Now, we didn't consciously think, okay, we're studying the language. But of course, we were implementing this, which is why we're fluent in our own native language. This is just questioning, how are you fluent in your own native language? And this is how. So, what to do now? The way to implement the fluency equation is by simply speaking Spanish and understanding Spanish. And what is Spanish? Spanish is grammar and vocab. That's what a Spanish sentence consists of. Every Spanish sentence is estamos hablando en español. Estamos hablando, that's pretty much grammar. It's also vocab because you need to know the verbs, but grammar, and then you just have to know the noun español. So that's, it's grammar and vocab. That's every Spanish sentence consists of. And so we only need one exercise to get fluent in Spanish and implement the fluency equation. And that is to have conversations. Because again, how did you get fluent in your own native language? Do you want to know how I got fluent in the 3 native languages I was born in? I grew up speaking Azeri with my mom and my dad and my family, because they speak Azeri, of course. And so they would ask me things like, what's your name? And then I would respond by saying, my name is Hamid, right? What I just told you now, I swear I haven't studied. As a kid, growing up, I was just speaking that. I was speaking Azeri, and I was understanding it by hearing my parents speak it. This is also why you adopt the accent of your parents, because you speak like your parents. And so the way I speak, at least, Adnade, for some reason, that's like a very specific part in Azerbaijan, which is like the accent's very specific. That's also why you see different accents in Spain and different, dialects for Spanish. It's because they learned by imitating their parents, by understanding their parents, not anyone else. And that's also how I developed my English accent and my Swedish accent and also my Spanish accent. But to clarify, I'm not a native Spanish speaker, of course. I learned Spanish. The way I learned English was going to an international English preschool and also watching like The Simpsons and English American TV while growing up. And so really what we need is 2 exercises. One exercise where we speak using grammar and vocab, and one exercise where we listen and understand grammar and vocab. And the reason why is because that trains both parts of the fluency equation: speaking grammar and vocab and understanding grammar and vocab. And that is literally the fluency equation. And so this is the formula, this is the equation that I use to get fluent in English, Swedish, Spanish. And in reality, this method isn't anything new. I didn't invent any of this. This is what they are, essentially. We saw 2 steps in getting fluent in any language was speaking and understanding. When we say understanding, we're talking about spoken, right? Understanding the spoken language. And so if you want to get better at understanding natives when they speak, you have to listen to natives and try to understand them when they speak. And that's because you get better at what you do. If you were trying to get better at bench press, would you do squats or bench press? Probably bench press, right? And so it makes no sense to read if you want to get better at listening to Spanish or speaking Spanish. And that's also why my 2 Arabic friends can't read or write Arabic, but they're still completely fluent in the language. Because these 2 steps are the only important part when it comes to fluency. At least like the goals that you and me have. If you really care about being able to write a massive essay with the most complicated words in Spanish, probably you need to read a lot of novels. If you want to get better at writing novels, you probably have to read and write Spanish novels. But most of us don't really care about that. Most of us just want to be able to have a conversation. And so conversational fluency essentially just has these 2 steps, speaking and understanding. And so the only 2 ladders we want to climb are these 2. And that's why I call them learn, sir. They just stand for listen, understand, repeat, and speak, understand, repeat. And these 2 ladders are extremely long because this process is repeated over and over again when you're a kid. And a lot of times, like you might be asking, why don't kids get fluent extremely quickly? Because they're stupid. The common step between these 2 is understanding. They're worse at making things make sense. As adults, we're way better at being able to make things make sense. We just have a better cognitive ability, and that's just a proven fact. There are studies on language learning between kids and adults, and obviously adults outperformed children in every cognitive practice because adults are smarter than kids. Let's not fool ourselves here. And this is the main aha moment that I realized before the summer of 2022, where I made the method to becoming fluent. And that is, if we want to become fluent, we need to climb the learn start ladders, which basically just means we need to listen and understand natives over and over again. And we need to speak like natives and understand what we are saying over and over again. Because Not only is that how we got fluent as kids, that is how Xiaoma got fluent in 44 days or something. All the YouTubers that got fluent in that way. Fundamentally, that is how we got fluent as kids. In fact, anytime anyone ever got fluent in any language, not only in Spanish, but in any language, it was through climbing these two ladders. And people will say like, no, my Spanish improved by reading. And it's like, your bench press could have improved by you doing squatting because it trains the ab muscles and you use your abs a little in bench press. But obviously that progress is much slower. You want to do the things that's going to help you achieve the goal, not the things that is correlated to achieving the goal, right? If you want to get better at bench press, you should probably do bench press. You probably don't want to do jumping jacks if you want to get better at bench press. Right? With that idea in mind, I implemented climbing these two ladders, aka the fluency equation. And by 120 hours of Spanish studying, I was able to reach a conversationally fluent level where I went on a call with and the call lasted an hour and we were only speaking in Spanish. And obviously, my Spanish wasn't perfect. No one's Spanish is perfect. No one's English is perfect. No one's Azeri is perfect. No one's Swedish is perfect. But we're talking about fluency. We're talking about conversational back and forth, which I achieved in 120 hours of total studying. Now I'm trying to reach native fluency where I'm not extremely native fluent. I'm able to completely speak fluent Spanish. If a Spanish person spoke to me, they would say I'm fluent, of course, but they wouldn't say I'm like a native. Although some natives told me my accent needs some improving. Of course, I'm fine with that because my goal has already been achieved, but native fluency takes honestly years. We're talking about conversational fluency. And so there are a million exercises you can do to climb these two ladders. And this is where the nuances come. And honestly, the best one is just to immerse yourself in the language, to speak with natives, have conversations with natives 24/7. And that's what Xiaoma did. And that's how he also gets fluent in all his languages. But most of us honestly can't do that. Language Lords, what he did was he made one exercise for speaking and one exercise for understanding, which is also what I did. And I essentially took those two ideas of how he did them. They inspired my own sort of methods of climbing these two ladders. The best way to do it is just immersion, which is essentially to live in a Spanish-speaking country in a household, or to just speak with natives online for a lot of time. It's like most of us can't do that. But what you can know is that the best exercises are those that allow us to climb the learn cert ladders as fast as possible. And that's how these YouTubers who spend 20 days to get fluent actually get fluent, or 40 days or 30 days or 60 days, or me saying I got fluent in 120 hours. That's how we did it. It's just prioritizing the two important part of the languages. I can tell you, I can't write for shit. I'm sorry for swearing. I can't write at all. I'm not good at the other parts of the languages. I'm just good at the things that I practiced. My grammar is not perfect. In fact, recently I went on a call with this guy who'd been studying for over 1,000 hours, and his grammar was better than mine when it comes to speaking. But when we had a conversation, it would seem like my Spanish is better, and that's because I was speaking faster with a better accent. However, his Spanish is better in some parts because that's the parts that he had been practicing, and my Spanish are better in other parts because that's the part that I was practicing. The main sauce is we're practicing to get conversationally fluent, and so why would we focus on anything other than the skills needed to have a conversation? The main reason why you're not fluent in Spanish is because you're not applying this equation. You're focusing too much on everything but Spanish. Because Spanish, in a conversation sense, is just speaking and understanding, and it is also speaking and understanding native Spanish, fast Spanish. I got so much hate on the Dreaming Spanish video, but they simply just didn't understand my point. Natives learned from natives. No one learned their native language like that. And so it doesn't fit into the formula very well. When something isn't explained to you, you don't understand it. And so this is the formula, this is the equation that made me a polyglot at 13 years old. By the way, a polyglot is someone who speaks 4 or more languages fluently and uses it in their daily life. Some people like to tell me I'm not a polyglot to boost their own ego or to feel better about themselves. And I've been speaking English this entire video. If you don't think I'm fluent in English, then like, good luck, bro. If you want personal help from me to implement this formula to get fluent in the same way I did and achieve very similar results, then you can check the description. Actually, recently, a guy in his 50s is able to already formulate his own sentences after about 3 weeks of applying this formula, which is just incredible. Obviously, he's put the time in. He's put tens of hours in to studying. If you're interested in getting help from me to become fluent in the same way I did, then check the description. I hope this video helped you, bro, and stay humble.